The Valoran Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They owned 400 star systems. They commanded 10,000 warships. They had crushed every species that ever challenged them. When their deep space sensors detected radio signals coming from a small blue planet called Earth, Emperor Thalvo simply smiled. Another primitive species to add to his collection. Humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. They had explored barely a dozen star systems. Their entire fleet numbered less than 50 ships. To the Valorans, humanity was nothing more than clever animals who had learned to build rockets. But humans wanted peace. They always tried peace first. Ambassador Park Yuna was 42 years old when she volunteered for First Contact. She had spent 20 years as a diplomat for the United Nations. She had ended civil wars. She had negotiated peace between nations that had hated each other for centuries. Her colleagues called her the woman who could make enemies shake hands. When Earth needed someone to represent all of humanity, they chose her. Yuna spent 3 years preparing. She learned the Valoran language until she could speak it without accent. She studied their history, their art, their customs. She memorized the names of every emperor who had ever ruled. She learned which colors were respectful and which were offensive. She learned how to bow, how to eat, how to greet nobles without causing insult. Her aide was a young officer named Kim Taiwan. He was 30 years old, quiet, and brilliant. He had graduated top of his class in military strategy, but he had requested this diplomatic mission instead of a combat posting. He believed that humanity's future lay in friendship, not war. Together, they boarded the diplomatic vessel Harmony and began the long journey to the heart of the Valoran Empire. The ship carried gifts from Earth. There was music from every culture, classical symphonies, traditional drums, jazz, opera. There were paintings and sculptures created by the finest artists. There were seeds from Earth's forests and flowers from its gardens. There were books translated into Valoran, sharing human poetry and philosophy and dreams. Most importantly, the ship carried a message of peaceful coexistence. Humanity wanted to be friends. Humanity wanted to trade, to share knowledge, to learn from the ancient Valoran civilization. Humanity offered respect and asked only for respect in return. The journey took 4 months. Yuna used every day to practice, to prepare, to hope. Taiwan watched her work and felt proud to serve alongside her. When the Harmony finally arrived at Velar Prime, the Valoran homeworld Yuna looked out the viewport and gasped. The planet was beautiful. Massive cities covered its surface, glittering with lights. Thousands of ships moved through its orbital space stations the size of small. Moons hung in perfect formation. This was a civilization that had mastered the stars, while humans were still learning to farm. The Valorans allowed the Harmony to land. They even provided an honor guard to escort the human delegation to the Imperial Palace. Yuna took this as a good sign. She dressed in her finest formal attire. It's a flowing gown of deep blue that she had been told was the color of respect in Valoran culture. Taewon walked beside her, carrying a small case that contained Earth's formal offer of friendship, a document signed by every nation on the planet. Bound in leather made from sustainable materials, sealed with gold from 6 different continents, the Imperial Palace was the largest building Yuna had ever seen. Its walls were made of white stone that seemed to glow. Its towers reached so high they disappeared into clouds. The steps leading to its entrance were wide enough for 1,000 people to walk side by side. Those steps were crowded today. Valoran nobles filled the sides, dressed in expensive robes and jewels. News drones floated overhead, broadcasting to every corner of the empire. This was an event. The whole galaxy was watching. Yuna felt nervous, but she did not show it. She climbed the steps with her head held high, her smile warm and genuine. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times. At the top of the steps stood High Commander Drathos. He was tall, even for a Valoran, with gray skin and cold yellow eyes. He was the Emperor's right hand, the commander of all military forces, the most powerful soldier in the Empire. He did not bow. Yuna bowed first, as custom demanded for a visitor. She spoke in perfect Valoran. I am Ambassador Park Yuna of Earth. I bring greetings from the people of humanity. We come in peace, with open hands and hopeful hearts. We ask only for the honor of friendship with the great Valoran Empire." She held out the case containing the friendship document. Drathos looked at her with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of her as a person. He looked at her the way someone looks at an insect. "Humanity will not be offered friendship," he said. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Humanity will be offered a choice. Kneel and serve the Empire as slaves, or be destroyed." Yuna's smile faltered, but she did not step back. She had prepared for difficult negotiations. "Perhaps we could discuss—" She never finished the sentence. Drathos moved faster than human eyes could follow. A plasma blade appeared in his hand, glowing bright orange with heat. He drove it through Yuna's chest in one smooth motion. Time seemed to stop. Yuna looked down at the blade in her body. She looked up at Drathos. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then her legs gave way, and she crumpled to the white stone steps. Tywin screamed. He lunged forward, but Valoran guards grabbed him and forced him to his knees. They held his head in place, making him watch as Yuna's blood spread across the ancient stone. From his throne inside the palace, Emperor Thalvos spoke through broadcast speakers that carried his voice across the plaza. "Let this serve as a lesson to all primitive species who forget their place. Humanity will kneel, or humanity will burn. There will be no discussion. There will be no negotiation. There is only obedience, or death." The gathered nobles applauded politely. The news drones captured everything. Tawan was dragged away, thrown into a small ship, and sent back toward human space. He was a messenger now. A warning to his species. He sat alone in that ship for 4 months, replaying the moment in his mind. Yuna's smile. Yuna's hope. Yuna's blood on white stone. He did not eat unless forced. He did not sleep unless his body shut down from exhaustion. But somewhere during that long journey home, his grief began to change. It became something harder, something colder, something patient. On Earth, 8 billion humans watched the footage of their ambassador's murder. They watched it on phones and televisions and holographic displays. They watched it in homes and schools and offices. And for the first time in a very long time, humanity stopped fighting with itself. They had a common enemy now. The news spread across Earth in minutes. Every screen, every device, every broadcast showed the same footage. Ambassador Park Yuna climbing those white steps with hope in her heart. High Commander Drathos driving a blade through her chest. Her body falling. Her blood spreading. For 3 days, humanity fell silent. People gathered in public squares without speaking. They held candles and photographs of the woman who had died trying to make peace. Strangers hugged strangers. Enemies forgot their arguments. Old grudges suddenly seemed meaningless. 8 billion people mourned as one. On the 4th day, the silence ended. United Earth Command had formed during the chaos of early space exploration. A council of nations working together to reach the stars. Now that council met in emergency session. Presidents and prime ministers and generals sat together in a massive underground chamber. They watched the footage one more time. Then they voted. The decision was unanimous, Single message was broadcast to every species in the galaxy that had a receiver capable of hearing it. The message was simple and clear. The Valoran Empire has declared war on humanity through the murder of Ambassador Park Yuna. Earth accepts. Across the galaxy. Alien species heard this message and laughed. They had seen the Valoran Empire crush rebellions before. They had watched the Empire burn worlds that refused to kneel. They knew the numbers. 400 star systems against 1. 10,000 warships against 50. 12,000 years of conquest against a species that had only left its planet. A generation ago, the Valorans themselves found the message amusing. Emperor Thalvos played it for his court, and the nobles laughed until their sides hurt. A tiny blue world thought it could challenge the greatest empire in galactic history. They will surrender within 1 cycle, Admiral Krathel predicted. We will not even need to send a full fleet. A small task force will be enough to make them kneel. On Velar Prime, betting pools opened on how quickly humanity would beg for mercy. They did not understand humans at all. Lieutenant Kim Taiwan arrived back on Earth, broken and hollow. He had not slept properly in months. He had not smiled since watching Yuna die. The military doctors wanted to send him to therapy to help him process his trauma. Instead, he asked to speak to the War Council. They granted his request. He stood before the most powerful leaders on Earth, a thin man with dark circles under his eyes and something cold burning behind them. "They do not know what we are," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. "They have ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They have crushed hundreds of rebellions. They think they know how wars work." He paused and looked around the room. "They have never fought humans." He pulled up a display showing Valoran military doctrine, their strategies, their tactics, their assumptions about how inferior species behaved when facing conquest. They expect us to fortify Earth and wait for their attack. They expect us to build defensive lines and try to hold territory. They expect us to fight the way every other species has fought them. And they expect us to lose, because that strategy always loses against a superior force. He changed the display to show human history. Thousands of years of warfare. Every trick. Every strategy. Every terrible thing humans had invented to kill each other. We invented total war. We invented guerrilla tactics. We invented deception on a scale they cannot imagine. We are a species that hunted mammoths with sticks and conquered a planet through pure, stubborn refusal to die. His voice grew harder. "Show them nothing. Let them think we are weak. Let them think we are afraid. And when they come expecting easy prey, we show them what happens when you corner a species that has survived 5 mass extinctions." The War Council listened. They agreed. Earth went dark. All non-essential communications stopped. All fleet movements were hidden. Ships that had been patrolling openly disappeared into the shadows of asteroids and moons. Earth's government stopped responding to outside messages. The planet itself seemed to go quiet. Valoran scouts entered human space expecting to find panic and preparation. Instead, they found silence. Empty space. No defensive lines being built. No fleets gathering. Just nothing. The scouts reported back that humanity had apparently given up. They were probably fighting among themselves, as primitive species often did when faced with overwhelming force. The Empire could take its time, but in the silence, humanity worked. Deep beneath mountains, factories that had never existed in any official record began producing weapons. Not copies of Valoran technology. Something different. Humans had looked at alien energy weapons and decided they were too easy to detect. Instead, they built railguns that fired solid projectiles at 3% the speed of light. No energy signature. No warning. Just death moving faster than sensors could track, in orbital stations hidden in the shadows of gas giants. Engineers assembled new ships. Small, fast, and hard to see. Each one built for hit and run attacks. Each one crewed by volunteers who knew they might not come home. Underwater facilities on Earth's ocean floors. Trained special forces in zero-gravity combat. Young men and women who had never known war learned to fight in ways the Valorans had never imagined. They learned to be patient, to be silent, to strike without warning and vanish without trace. Kim Taiwan oversaw much of this work. He had been promoted to commander. Some said it was because of his experience with the enemy. Others said it was because he had watched Ambassador Park die and had earned the right to help avenge her. He rarely spoke about that day. But sometimes, late at night, people would see him standing alone, staring at a small photograph. A woman with a warm smile and hopeful eyes. The woman who had believed in peace. He was going to show the galaxy what happened when peace was murdered. 6 months passed. The Valorans grew impatient. They decided the primitive humans had been given enough time to suffer and fear. It was time to finish this farce and add Earth to the Empire. Admiral Krathel assembled a fleet of 200 warships. It was far more than necessary, but the Emperor wanted a spectacle. He wanted the galaxy to see humanity crushed quickly and completely. The fleet entered human space expecting to find a planet cowering in terror. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the asteroid belt. Hidden among millions of rocks, 300 human ships powered up their engines. Captain Li Giwu sat in the command chair of the destroyer Vengeance. She was 34 years old. Her younger sister had been killed 3 months ago when the Valorans had bombed a human colony as a warning. She was not interested in warnings anymore. All ships she broadcast on encrypted channels. Remember Ambassador Park. Remember why we fight. Cross 300 bridges. Crews prepared for battle. The thunder was about to begin. Admiral Krathel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Imperial Wrath, and watched Earth grow larger in his view screen. The small blue planet hung in space like a jewel waiting to be claimed. It looked peaceful, quiet, helpless. 200 Valoran warships followed behind him in perfect formation. Each ship was massive, bristling with energy cannons and protected by shields that could stop asteroid impacts. The smallest vessel in his fleet was larger than anything humans had ever built. This would not be a battle. This would be a harvest. Scan the system, Krathel ordered. Find their pathetic defense fleet so we can destroy it before lunch. His sensor officers obeyed. They swept the solar system with the most advanced detection equipment in the galaxy. They searched for energy signatures, heat patterns, communication signals. They found nothing. Admiral, the lead sensor officer, reported, confusion in his voice. There are no military vessels in the system. Earth's orbital space is empty except for civilian stations. Krathel frowned. They are hiding. Find them. More scans. More nothing. The human defense fleet had simply vanished. Perhaps they fled, suggested his second-in-command. Perhaps they knew they could not win and abandoned their homeworld. Krathel considered this. It would be disappointing if the humans had run. The Emperor wanted a spectacle, not a simple occupation. But either way, the outcome would be the same. Earth would belong to the Empire. Move the fleet toward the planet, he ordered. If they will not fight us, we will simply take what we came for. 200 warships advanced. They were halfway to Earth. When the first railgun round hit, the projectile was a solid tungsten rod the size of a small car. It traveled at 3% the speed of light. It had no energy signature, no heat trail, nothing for sensors to detect. It existed only as kinetic energy given form. It punched through the Imperial Wrath's shields as if they were made of paper. It continued through the hull through 3 decks, through the primary reactor containment chamber, and out the other side, the flagship exploded. Krathel died before his brain could process what had happened. Across the Valoran formation, officers screamed in confusion. Their admiral was gone. Their flagship was debris, and they still could not see what had attacked them. Then the second wave of railgun rounds arrived. They came from the asteroid belt, fired by weapons hidden among millions of rocks. Each round was a hammer blow that shields could not stop. Valoran ships died in silence, torn apart by weapons they could not detect or understand. And then the human fleet appeared. Not 50 ships, 300. They rose from the shadows of asteroids, from craters on distant moons, from the darkness between planets. Small ships, fast ships, ships built to strike and vanish. Each one crewed by humans who had spent 6 months training for this moment. Captain Ligu pushed her destroyer Vengeance to maximum speed. Her ship was tiny compared to the Valoran cruisers. But she was faster, more maneuverable, and she was very, very angry. Weapons fire at will, she commanded. The human fleet hit the confused Valorans like wolves attacking a scattered herd. They did not form neat battle lines. They did not follow predictable patterns. They struck from every direction at once, overwhelming sensors, confusing targeting systems. Creating chaos, the Valoran ships were built for traditional naval combat. Stand at distance. Exchange fire. Let superior firepower win. They had never faced an enemy that refused to play by those rules. Human ships dove between larger vessels, so close that the Valorans could not fire without hitting each other. They launched missiles in swarms. not expecting every missile to hit, but knowing that even a few impacts would overload shields. They targeted engines and sensors, crippling ships rather than destroying them, creating obstacles that blocked firing lanes in the first hour. 40 Valoran ships died. The new Valoran commander, promoted by circumstance when his superiors were killed, tried to restore order. He called for a tactical retreat, for the fleet to regroup and establish proper battle formation. But humans did not let enemies retreat. Li Gu led a squadron of 12 destroyers in a hunting pattern. They chased damaged Valoran ships, finishing off those too slow to escape. They blocked retreat routes. They turned tactical withdrawal into desperate flight. "They're running," reported her weapons officer, a young man named Han Seojin, who had lied about his age to join the fleet. "Should we let them go?" Giwu thought of her sister, thought of the colony burning, thought of Ambassador Park bleeding on white stone steps. "No," she said. "Today the galaxy learns that attacking humans has consequences." The Battle of Seoul lasted 11 hours. When it was over, 183 Valoran warships had been destroyed. Only 17 managed to escape back to Imperial space. Humanity lost 62 ships. Over 4,000 sailors died, but they had won. The survivors gathered near Earth, damaged ships helping each other, crews mourning their dead while also feeling something they had not expected to feel. Pride. Commander Kim Taiwan arrived on a fast transport to personally thank every captain. He moved from ship to ship, shaking hands, learning names, remembering faces. These were the people who had turned theory into victory. When he reached the Vengeance, Captain Li Juwu met him at the airlock. She was exhausted. Her uniform was stained with smoke and sweat, but she stood straight and saluted. Commander Kim, we did what you asked. We showed them nothing, and then we showed them everything." Taiwan returned the salute. For the first time in over a year, something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "Ambassador Park would be proud," he said quietly. Giwu nodded. "We've only begun to make them pay, sir." Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread faster than light. Species that had cowered under Valoran rule for millennia heard the impossible news. A primitive planet, a species that had only just reached the stars, had destroyed a Valoran fleet. On 100 worlds, slaves and subjects whispered to each other in secret. Was it possible? Could the Empire be beaten? On Villar Prime, Emperor Thalvos received the news in stunned silence. For the first time in his long reign, something cold touched his heart. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. He had expected the humans to break quickly. He had expected easy conquest and a new slave race. Instead, he had lost nearly 200 warships and his best admiral. "Send 5 fleets," he commanded, his voice hard. "Send 1,000 ships. Burn that planet to ash and salt the ground where it stood. I want humanity erased from history." His generals bowed and hurried to obey. But in the shadows of the throne room, ancient advisors exchanged worried glances. They had seen the battle recordings. They had watched how the humans fought. Not like desperate prey. Like predators who had finally been given permission to hunt. For the first time. Some of them wondered if the Empire had made a terrible mistake. The war had only begun. Emperor Thalvos kept his word. 5 full battle fleets, over 1,000 warships, converged on human space. It was the largest military force the Empire had deployed in 300 years. Enough firepower to crack planets, enough soldiers to occupy 100 worlds. The galaxy watched and waited for humanity to die. But when the Armada arrived, they found empty space. Earth was there, of course. The blue planet hung in its orbit, surrounded by debris from the previous battle. But there was no human fleet waiting to defend it. No desperate last stand. Just silence. The Valoran commanders were confused. Their scouts searched every corner of the solar system. They found abandoned stations, empty shipyards, and a single automated message beacon. The message was simple. We are not hiding. We are hunting. 3 days later, a supply convoy 60 light-years behind the front lines was destroyed. 12 cargo ships carrying food, fuel, and ammunition were torn apart by weapons that came from nowhere. There were no survivors to report what had happened. A week after that, a communication relay station on the edge of Valoran space went dark. When investigators arrived, they found the station intact but empty. Every crew member had vanished. Written on the wall in the Valoran language were 3 words: "For Ambassador Park." Humans were not fighting a defensive war. They were not trying to protect their territory. They had abandoned traditional strategy entirely. They were hunting commander. Choi Sun-hee led a strike squadron of 18 fast attack ships. She was 41 years old. A former merchant captain who had volunteered for military service the day after watching Ambassador Park die. She had no formal military training, but she understood something the Valoran admirals did not. Space was big, really big. And in all that darkness, a small ship that knew how to stay quiet could go anywhere. Her target was the orbital shipyards above Velor Prime itself, the heart of the Empire's military production. The most heavily defended location in the galaxy, she spent 3 months getting there. Her squadron moved in silence, hiding behind asteroids, drifting through empty space with engines cold, pretending to be debris whenever sensors swept nearby. They ate cold rations to avoid heat signatures. They communicated only with tight beam lasers that could not be intercepted. When they finally reached the Valoran homeworld, Sun-hee gathered her crews for a final briefing. "We will not survive this," she told them honestly. "The yards are protected by 200 warships in orbital defense platforms. We do not have the firepower to fight them directly." She pulled up a tactical display showing the shipyard's layout. "But we do not need to fight them. We only need to reach the yards themselves. There are 47 capital ships in dry dock, being repaired or constructed. If we can destroy those ships before they launch, we hurt the Empire more than any fleet battle ever could." Her pilots looked at the display. They understood what she was asking. "I will not order you to do this," Sun-hee continued. "Anyone who wants to turn back can leave now with no shame. You have already given more than anyone could ask." No one left. The attack happened during a shift change, when attention was divided and response times were slowest. Sun-hee's squadron dropped out of hiding and accelerated to maximum speed. They did not try to fight the defense fleet. They simply flew past it, too fast and too small to intercept effectively. Valoran commanders screamed orders. Weapons fired in all directions. But the human ships were already inside the shipyard perimeter. Sun-hee targeted the largest vessel in dry dock, a super dreadnought that would have taken 5 years to build. Her ship's railguns fired until the barrels melted. Her missiles launched until the magazines were empty. Then she rammed. Across the shipyard, her squadron did the same. 18 small ships against 47 capital vessels. It was not a fair fight. It was never meant to be. When the explosions faded, the Valoran Empire had lost 10 years of ship production. 47 vessels that would never terrorize anyone. A blow to the heart of their military might, Sun-hee did not survive. Neither did most of her crews. But their names were carved into a memorial on Earth. And songs were written about their courage. The galaxy heard those songs, while strike teams hunted military targets. Other humans pursued a different mission. They had learned that the Valoran Empire maintained its power not just through strength, but through slavery. Hundreds of species served the Empire against their will. Their populations kept in labor camps and forced to work for Valoran benefit. Sergeant Beak. Dowan led a special forces team to Thesan 4, a world that had been conquered 800 years ago. The Thesan people were gentle beings, known for their art and philosophy before the Empire crushed their culture. Now they worked in mining camps, digging resources from their own planet to fuel Valoran ships. Dowan's mission was not to kill Valorans. It was to free Thizans. His team landed in secret, made contact with the underground resistance, and spent 6 weeks mapping the largest labor camp on the planet. 300,000 Theasans were held there, including children and elderly who were too weak to work but too valuable as hostages to release. The rescue operation took 4 hours. Dowan's team disabled the camp's communication systems, neutralized the guards, and opened the gates. They had brought transport ships hidden nearby, enough to evacuate everyone. When the first Thesan families walked out of the camp, they could not believe what was happening. Many of them had been born there. They had never known freedom. An elderly Thesan approached Dowan. She had lived in the camp for 60 years. Her hands were scarred from decades of mining work. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you risk your lives for us? We are not your people." Dowan looked at her. He thought about Ambassador Park, who had believed that all species could be friends. He thought about the message humanity wanted to send to the galaxy. "'Cause someone should have done this centuries ago," he said. "And because this is who we choose to be." The Thessans were transported to neutral space. They were not asked to fight for humanity. They were not conscripted or used as political tools. They were simply given medical care, food, and the freedom to rebuild their lives. Word spread on a dozen worlds. Enslaved species heard stories of the strange humans who freed prisoners and asked nothing in return. They heard about the warriors who fought the Empire not for conquest, but for justice. They heard about a dead ambassador named Park Yuna, who had come in peace and been murdered for it, and they began to hope the Valoran Empire was learning something their 12,000 years of conquest had never taught them. They knew how to fight enemies who wanted territory or power. They knew how to crush rebellions driven by desperation. But they had never faced an enemy that fought for an idea. An enemy that would rather die than submit. An enemy that turned their cruelty into inspiration for others. Commander Kim Taiwan watched the reports come in from across the galaxy. Strike teams hitting targets deep in enemy space. Rescue operations freeing slaves. Species that had been silent for centuries, beginning to whisper about resistance. He thought about Ambassador Park, about her belief that humanity could bring something new to the galaxy. She had wanted peace. She had wanted friendship. In a way, Taiwan thought she was still getting what she wanted, just not the way anyone had imagined. The Empire was beginning to crack, and humanity was just getting started. 2 years had passed since Ambassador Park Yuna died on the steps of the Imperial Palace. 2 years of war. 2 years of blood and fire and sacrifice. And now, the galaxy was changing in ways no one had predicted. The Rithani Collective was the first to act. They were an old species conquered by the Valorans 6,000 years ago. They had served the Empire loyally, or at least quietly, for all those centuries. But they had watched the humans fight. They had heard the stories of freed slaves and destroyed shipyards. They had seen that the Empire could bleed. Their leader, Council of Elders who had secretly kept their old traditions alive, sent a message to Earth. It was short and simple. We stand with humanity. Never again will we bow. Within a month, 14 other species had made similar declarations. The Thesan Republic, rebuilt by survivors of the labor camps, pledged their support. The Karathi, a warrior species that had been used as shock troops by the Empire, turned their weapons against their masters. Even the Vorian, a race of scientists who had tried to remain neutral, offered their technology to the human cause, the Valoran. Empire was cracking apart. Emperor Thalvos watched his domain crumble with growing rage. He had ruled for 300 years. He had crushed rebellions that history books had forgotten. But this was different. This was not one species fighting for freedom. This was 100 species, inspired by the same impossible idea. Burn them all, he ordered. Every world that supports the humans, reduce it to ash. But his fleets were scattered. His supply lines were broken. His generals were dying in ambushes that came from nowhere. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Valoran military was losing control. Commander Kim Taiwan had been promoted to admiral. He had spent 2 years building something that had never existed before, an alliance of species united not by fear, but by hope. It was messy. It was complicated. Species that had ancient grudges against each other learned to work together. Cultures that had never met learned to communicate. But they all agreed on one thing. The Empire had to fall. The Allied fleet gathered in deep space, far from any Valoran sensor net. 1,000 ships from 23 different species. Humans served alongside Thessans, Rithani, alongside Karathi. Different bodies, different languages, different histories, but the same flag flew from every mast, a simple design showing a human hand reaching upward toward stars. Admiral Kim addressed them all from the bridge of his flagship. The Ambassador Park. 2 years ago, a woman came to this galaxy with hope in her heart. She believed that all species could live in peace. The Empire answered her hope with murder. They thought killing one ambassador would break humanity. They thought we would kneel like everyone else. Paused, looking out at the fleet displayed on his screens. They were wrong. We do not break. We do not kneel. And today, we finish what Ambassador Park started. Today, we bring peace to the galaxy. Not the peace of slavery, the peace of freedom. The Allied fleet jumped to hyperspace. Destination, Velar Prime. The Valoran homeworld was still heavily defended. 2,000 ships guarded the planet, along with orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapons. But they were facing an enemy that had already proven it could not be stopped. The battle lasted 3 days. Human captains led strikes against key targets. Using the guerrilla tactics they had perfected over 2 years of war, Rithani's ships provided heavy firepower, their ancient vessels finally free to fight without restriction. Thesan squadrons flew with a desperate courage born from centuries of oppression. Species that had never fought before stood side by side against the enemy that had enslaved them all. On the second day, the orbital defenses fell. On the third day, the Valoran fleet surrendered. Admiral Kim's shuttle landed on the same steps where Ambassador Park had died. The white stone was still stained with old blood. Thousands of people watched. Valoran citizens, freed slaves, allied soldiers. News drones broadcasting to every corner of the galaxy. Emperor Thalvos waited at the top of the steps. He was old now, older than he had seemed 2 years ago. The war had aged him. His eyes held something they had never held before. Fear. Kim climbed those steps slowly. He remembered watching Yuna climb them, full of hope. He remembered watching her die. He had imagined this moment many times. In his darkest hours, he had dreamed of killing Thalvos with his own hands, of making the Emperor suffer the way Yuna had suffered. But when he reached the top, he did not draw a weapon. He did not give orders for execution. Instead, he stopped at the exact spot where Yuna had fallen and looked the Emperor in the eyes. "You thought killing one woman would break us," Kim said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You did not understand what you were facing. Ambassador Park came offering peace. You chose war, and now you will face the consequences." Thalvos sneered. "So kill me. Take your revenge. Prove that you are just as savage as we always said." Kim shook his head. "No, you will be tried, publicly, fairly, by a tribunal of every species you have wronged. The galaxy will hear testimony from the slaves you kept, the worlds you burned, the cultures you destroyed. And then the galaxy will decide your fate." The Emperor stared at him in disbelief. "You have the power to execute me. Why waste time with trials?" "Because that is not who we are," Kim replied. Ambassador Park believed in justice, not vengeance. She believed in building something better, not just destroying what is broken. We honor her memory by being worthy of it. The trial lasted 6 months. Thalvos and his commanders faced charges from representatives of over 200 species. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of crimes against sentient life. The sentence was not death, but imprisonment. Thalvos would spend the rest of his long life watching the galaxy heal from what he had done. On the first anniversary of the Empire's fall, a ceremony was held on Earth. Ambassador Park Yuna was buried in a garden that would eventually cover entire continents. Every species she had died trying to befriend sent seeds. Thesan flowers grew beside Rithani trees. Karathi grasses mixed with human roses. Admiral Kim spoke at the ceremony. His voice carried to every world in the new alliance. Ambassador Park came to the galaxy asking for friendship. She was murdered for her hope. But today, looking at this garden, looking at the ships of 100 species orbiting above us, I believe she got what she wanted. We are not just allies. We are not just survivors. We are friends. Different species, different cultures, different histories, but one family. He looked up at the stars. They thought they could break us by killing our best. Instead, they united us. They gave us a cause worth fighting for. And now, because of one woman's sacrifice, the galaxy knows a new truth. Across 1,000 worlds, people of every species listened. Humanity came in peace and was answered with blood. We rose in wrath and answered with mercy. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. We are the species that remembers what cruelty costs, and we will never let it happen again. The garden grew. The alliance flourished. And in schools across the galaxy, children of every species learned about Ambassador Park Unot, the woman who believed in peace, and whose death had finally brought it. The Valoran Empire had ruled through fear for 12,000 years. They had never imagined that one small planet could bring them down. They had not understood that humans were different, stubborn, adaptable, willing to die for ideas rather than just survival. They had not understood that killing humanity's hope would only make it stronger. The galaxy learned too late, but it learned, and it never forgot.